All right, everybody, while people are signing in, I just want to give a quick welcome. We're going to take a couple of minutes here and let everybody who's attending get signed on, get their volume set, all that good stuff. Just want to go over a few notes for those of you who are new to these classes. This won't be as relevant to you guys because y'all are new, but for those of you who have been attending, this is a new format of class that we're trying today, so this should be pretty fun. It'll be discussion based. We're going to take a lot of questions from you all, so we're just trying something new. So do know that we're trying out some new formats, and bear with us as we're learning. We want to get some feedback from you guys too about how this goes. So what we're aiming for today is, I see questions already coming in. Okay, if you have an echo, send me a chat and I'll try and help you out with that in a minute. Just saw that some sound issues. Feel free to send me a chat about sound issues. The way this is going to work is we've noticed we get a lot of questions about containers. They're an investment. I know that, and we go through a lot of them as we're working on our garden. So Andy is with us today to take questions from you all. We're going to be covering some common topics that Andy gets questions on. So I'm very glad to have him today because I'm like you all. I'm someone who comes in and has no idea what's by. So this will be a great class for me as well. For any of you all who are not used to using the Zoom format, we can't see you or hear you during this class. So as you have questions, hit that Q&A box, type the questions into the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring that. And I'll be monitoring if you have any other issues, you can send them in by chat as well. I'll monitor both, but Q&A is that primary method to send me questions. Finally, we are going to try and get to specific stuff today if we can, if you've got specific plants you're dealing with, but we're going to hold most of those probably until the end so we can cover some basics of stuff that everybody can benefit from. So just be aware of that. And if we can't get to your questions today, as always, we encourage you to follow up with us. So I think that about covers it. We are recording thank you. Yes, I will fix that. The chat's disabled. For those of you who don't know Andy, he works at our Fair Oaks store. Hi. He works at our Fair Oaks store primarily. And Andy, I'm going to let you tell a little bit about what you do because I know you cover a lot of products that are kind of the foundations of what we use in our gardens. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and then we'll get started with some Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Sally. I appreciate the intro. Yeah, my journey in gardening and with Merrifield Garden Center started about 9 years ago. Gosh, it has been 9 years. Yeah. April of 2015, I started working in the pottery department. In my past, I have made pottery as a hobby. Didn't take it as seriously as when I got a job here, and I was just introduced to our current pottery buyer at the time, and I just worked that department along with our loading dock, which has a lot of materials that we also use in containers, not exclusively to containers, of course. We have mulch, planting mix, all sorts of things. But between those two departments, I was able to really kind of carve out a lot of education for myself in terms of container gardening, plantings in containers, just generally indoor, outdoor, and have got a lot of knowledge over the last 9 years of being a buyer and seller. And I just, I love it. I'm excited about it, and I'm ready to hopefully answer a lot of good questions. And where do you want to start, Sally?
Right. So I think we already have some questions coming in, so that's good. But I'm going to start, Andy, with some of the general rules of thumb that you and I were talking about when we were coming up with this list of questions. So you mentioned to me when we were talking last week that in general, the best method, if you're coming in and you need a container, is to actually choose your plant first and then to go select a container based on that. So can you elaborate a little bit on why that is?
I can, and not that anything is set in stone, but you know, if you see a beautiful container and you love it, that's one part of it. If you know that you're going to put a plant in there, you're limited to the volume in which that container has. So if you feel the need to have a specific plant, I think it's great to choose that plant first, and then let's create a home, a container, if you will, that that plant is going to be the happiest in. For every plant has a different sized root system. So we want to accommodate those roots in an appropriate way so that plant can have the best chance for success and longevity.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And I know sometimes you come in with a container that you love and want to pick something that goes in that too. All right. So next question, do you have, because I know you mentioned plants have different size root systems. Are there any rules in general that you can follow when you're trying to pick a container size?
So if you're buying a plant that has already been started, we're not talking about starting from seed, but you've picked a plant out. By measuring the diameter of that root ball, so from one edge across to the other is your diameter, and most of us are probably using US standard, so we're talking inches. So for example, if something measured 10 inches in diameter, most containers we'd want to just go up 2 inches in diameter. So if we bought a 10-inch diameter plant, or a plant that had a 10-inch diameter root system, we'd want like a 12-inch diameter container, the inside container from the inside edges of the container, which will create an inch ring all the way around, 1 inch on this side, 1 inch on this side, or an inch all the way around, a little bit extra room so that plant can start to establish its root systems and be really happy in that.
All right, awesome. Okay, we have a good question that came in that's related to this. Is it okay if the pot is too big per se for the plant? Does that cause any issues?
That can be problematic. The issues that can arise is if you have a lot more potting media in a little itty bitty plant, that media can hold lots of water, and then those roots could be subject to too much water, could lead to fungal issues, root rot, and it could be detrimental. I think aesthetically as well, if you had this big, large barrel of a container and a very small single flowered plant in there, it might not look as good as if you had a ratio of sizes that just more would suit that. But for me, I would be more worried about, the negative impacts as far as just like holding too much water retention, or, maybe I don't want to buy 15 bags of potting soil for a single flower. So yeah, I think having something that's closer fitting is important on a couple different levels.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely killed some of my house plants doing that, overwatering, like just because I had the pot that was bigger and I was like, oh, I think it'll be fine, and then overwatered. But I'm not super careful about that.
Not to get overly detailed into it too deep, but on the flip side, some plants prefer a really nice tight container. Their roots want to be tight because that's how they grow in nature. A quick example of that would be like a snake plant wants to be in a tight container. They naturally grow in like rock crevices and environments like that. So we want to mimic that. But that's as simple as, if you're shopping with us, you ask any of our plant experts, what does this plant want? And we'll lead you in the right direction.
Is that more common, that issue? Is that more common with houseplants? Like,
I'm not as familiar, so I'm not going to speak to it too much. It's just one of the examples I know. There very well are other plants that want that type of environment, but unfortunately I can't really speak into detail on that one.
Yeah, I know our houseplants especially get really specific, and there's a lot of them that do like that tight. I remember some of our plant specialists talking about that on some of their calls. Okay, next question from Kathy. What about tall plants? Does that cause any changes if someone comes to you and they have like a tree or maybe an ornamental grass or something really tall?
So it can. The things that I would be thoughtful about if we were getting a really tall plant is back to aesthetics. So I don't want a 4-foot tall plant in a foot tall planter. It will look skewed. It won't look quite right to the eye. And the other scenario might be, I've got a really tall plant and I put it in a really thin, narrow container and I keep it out on my balcony. I live in a DC high rise or something. There's lots of wind. I could see that becoming a wind issue. I wouldn't want to set sail to that thing and have it tip over. Those are the things that I would be thinking about. But you can plant tall plants in containers. We have a variety of different material. So, you know, we've got plenty of concrete planters here that are not going anywhere, even in high wind.
Okay. Yeah, I actually have that issue. I have a plastic container because I wanted something really cheap, to be honest. And I have the issue that every time the wind comes through, I live on the 11th floor and that thing tips over every time. So that's definitely, but this actually leads well into the next segment. And we've had a question come in about this. So I know there's a lot of different types of materials for pots, and you've mentioned that. So we actually had a question come in, and I want to cover a few of these kind of common issues I think that people have to deal with when they're looking for materials. So I really know there's like terracotta and ceramic and maybe resin, concrete. I don't know the technical terms for those, but do you have recommendations, like which material would you use outside? What's the most durable for winter? What's good for lightweight, that kind of stuff. I'm going to go on for a little bit here, but the first question we had come in from one of our people, from Jackie, is what's the best plant container for outside? So maybe we start with that.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there are going to be some differences in how we look at the materials in which we use and the styles of pottery used from outside to inside. At our garden center, we do have pottery a little bit everywhere, but we have two main sections. We do have a somewhat of an indoor section in our indoor greenhouse and an outdoor section, which is all housed outside. Things that outdoor containers from our suppliers are, for example, anything that is made out of clay that I would sell as an outdoor setting is going to be a thicker clay. Some of them are labeled frost resistant, which is different than the term frost proof, meaning it's just going to hold up better. Nothing is Mother Nature proof, but we want something a little more thick to get through the seasonal changes. The winter season is the hardest season on our containers. So part of materials, and I don't want to bounce around too much, but also things like saucers. We'd want to use a saucered container inside to protect our floors. We would not want to use that outside, especially during the winter where the water would catch, it would freeze, it would expand and cause damage. And a winter freeze can damage a terracotta clay planter, a thicker clay glazed ceramic planter, a concrete planter. Once again, nothing is technically Mother Nature proof, but the thicker clay, the concrete, is going to hold up much better. I've had plenty of customers with that thinner terracotta clay that have done great. Keeping those pots elevated, getting the water to drain out of them can be really important for longevity as well.
Okay, so if you're dealing with winter and you're trying to keep your pots from breaking, you said concrete is really good. Terracotta can work as long as you treat it well. Is that like?
No, let me be a little more specific on that. Terracotta is a thinner clay, and it is generally looked at as overall just a little more fragile, but it's very economic, and it's been around forever, and it's got this natural, beautiful, traditional look. And many people use terracotta inside and outside. I definitely see more damages happen to terracotta over the winter. But the best thing out of any, regardless of material, is putting our containers up on risers or pot feet so that the water has a place to drain out and there is not a shallow puddle of water underneath your container during our cold winter season.
Okay. Yeah. And can you explain a little bit about what the pot feet are for people who aren't familiar? They're
Yeah.
ceramic feet, right?
So this is not a true example, but I can use it to speak to what I'm talking about. This has an attached saucer. So once again, this would be an indoor container. We wouldn't want this out during the winter. But if we see these little ornamental feet that the saucer is on, we sell individual feet that go right where you see these. They slide underneath. They keep our pot elevated off the ground, allowing water to freely release, and it's not sitting in that puddle. That is the best way to give your a longer lifespan on any of your pottery, regardless of material.
Okay, great. I'm going to jump to the next question here, and then I want to get back at there. I see an interesting one about deciding on the pot size I want to jump back to. But first, can plastic containers, how do they do outside in the winter?
So plastic containers come in all sorts of different grades, if you will. There is what I'll call economical plastic, and then there's like commercial grade plastic. We carry a brand called Crescent Gardens. It is a commercial grade plastic. It holds up wonderfully. It is an extremely durable plastic with also a really good aesthetic, both modern, traditional stylings. So that brand in particular, I'm familiar with, does wonderful outside. Other plastics that aren't commercial grade can work for quite a long time, but over time they can start to bulge or break depending if the roots are getting really robust or just from the push and pull, heave and pull of the warmth in the freeze over seasonal change.
Is the difference when you're saying commercial grade? Because I'm I'm thinking of my like the container I have that tips outside in the wind. That's really thin plastic. That's not commercial grade, I'm assuming. Is commercial grade like a thicker, more durable? Like
it's not necessarily thicker. It is, and I don't know the true science behind it. It is simply a more durable than plastic.
So maybe
it can still come in very thin. It can come in dual walled as well, meaning it has a hollow in between the inside and the outside of the container. But however they process that plastic material, it is a more durable plastic.
Got it. Okay, interesting. So what was the brand you said that we carry that's that?
Crescent.
Crescent. Okay, yeah, I'm just picturing this container. I just got it because I needed something and I could like squish it if it didn't have soil in it. It's not, it's become my like nemesis container. I need to replace it. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back for a minute to sizing because this question came in from Cindy and it's really an interesting one. Okay, so you buy a pot. I'm gesturing like size of pot. If you're trying to figure out proper sizing, you're gonna plant multiple plants in that pot. Can you kind of measure the total circumference of those plants, all kind of clump them together, measure the circumference, and then would you measure out from that to your like extra inch or two?
Yeah. So I think when you're doing that's a great question, Cindy. So when you're doing a multiple plant planting in a container, I think if you still kind of use the loose rule of thumb of having that extra inch around the outside. So as long as, you know, let's say that we have a foot diameter container, a 12-inch container, we would just use up a 10-inch diameter space within that container. And so you can, yes, you can measure, or sometimes, you know, if I've done like a planting in a large container with many different pansies, and I use my fist to kind of mark gently like how many pansies I would be able to fit in that container. And you know, nothing is perfect, so you start planning and see how that fills out, and you fill it up with a little extra room around the outside.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm actually going to jump back a little farther now because I was thinking we could talk about this when we talk a little bit about some of the seed pots. But okay, so talking about sizing this, and also this may be a question for James tomorrow. Is it better? Okay, so you're growing plants from seed. Once you have your little seedlings, is it better to transfer them into the big pot that's the size for the adult plant, or should they go into a smaller pot and then a bigger pot, just in terms of worrying about overwatering and all that stuff?
I do want James to answer that, but I do want to give my little bit of what I'll say speculation would be is that you would size up. You would start with your small container, like your seed starting. It kind of looks like a ice cube tray. It's a very small seed starting spot, and then you would work that up. I'm going to tune in because I'd love to hear what our experts in that department would say, because as I spoke to earlier, it's about having the right moisture levels in that soil and not having too much, but still having enough soil and media and nutrition for that plant. So let's definitely tune in on that. And if I miss it, Sally, I'm going to be asking you that very same question.
Sounds good. Yeah. So for anybody interested in going into detail, James White is going to be on here tomorrow discussing vegetable seeds, and he can talk more about seed starting products, all that stuff. And then actually, Saturday, this Saturday, the 25th, Larry Shapiro is going to be doing a whole seed starting class actually at the Fair Oaks store. So people who really want to dive into that, come to that class. He teaches all the basics and can help you pick out your supplies and all that stuff. Okay, moving on. Good question. This is from Anne. When will Merrifield receive its spring inventory of pots, especially cast concrete? Do we have those now?
So yeah, awesome question. And minutes before I signed in for a webinar, I was currently unpacking ceramic pots for a spring order. I've actually already unpacked 66% of the concrete, the cast stone or concrete, if you will. So I've got a nice selection of brand new, different styles of concrete pots, a really beautiful selection of all sorts of different colors of ceramics. It's coming in now, it's getting unpacked. It's going, it's great.
Okay. Next question is, okay, I think we answered that one. Next question, can you purchase garden pots, like the grower's pot? Can you then insert that into like a glazed or decorative pot? Does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's something that quite a few people will do. You can keep a plant in a grower's pot until its roots eventually, we don't want anything to become what's called root bound, where the roots have hit the sides of the container and then they start to spiral and wrap around themselves. That's what keeping that extra inch or two of media and sizing is why that's important. Each plant has a different growth cycle, but you absolutely can sleeve that grower's container into a decorative pot. For example, in our greenhouse, an indoor container called a cashpo, or also known as a sleeve, as the name sleeve would suggest. It is a drainless piece of pottery. I don't know if any of these are cashpos. This has a plug in it, but it would be a pot with no drainage. So this is plugged up. So this is kind of like that. And then you would just put your grower's container right in here. You would try to make it a nice fit so it just looks aesthetically pleasing. The only thing we want to be a little bit more cautious of is our watering. When we have something that has no drainage and we put our grower's container in it, if we overwater and there's no place for that water to release, we go back to the reoccurring theme a little bit here has been all that media holding onto the water. We need that to release. We need to dry out in between watering. So those are just some of the things you need to be a little bit more careful about if you're using that sort of system. You absolutely could put in a grower's container into a decorative ceramic that has drainage and you don't have that issue. Okay.
Okay, I want to address this because we get this question all the time. This is about reusing pots, and I'm not sure if you would want to answer this question or refer this to the plant clinic or maybe to Peg Beer. Actually, I know talks about this all the time. So when if you're going to reuse your pots every year, like you plant your annuals in them or you pull a plant out, do you need to disinfect that pot before you reuse it?
I'm going to say I don't think it's necessary. There could be some things like if you were growing something that you treated with a chemical, then I might want to sanitize or clean that. If it was an annual planting that we're just going to put more plant material in it, but it's going to be different, I would say less disinfectant, but a little bit of a refresher of some fresh potting media. So there's some nutrition there. So as the potting media loses volatility over time and the plants that had once grown and they have taken that nutrition away, for doing a new planting in the same container, add in a little fresh media, take some old out, add some new in.
Yeah. I know I think what Peg usually says, Peg, for those of you who don't know, is she does most of our container gardening classes. She does all beautiful container gardens. I think she usually would say if there wasn't like a problem with the past plants, then you're pretty good. Add in some fresh and keep going. If you have like a diseased plant or something, then clean it out. So I think that's what she'd say, but anybody who has questions about that, that's a great question for our plant clinic if you're not sure. And you guys can send me an email or call the stores and talk to them about if you had like a diseased plant in the pot or any issues you might have had. Okay, wow, we have a ton of questions coming in now. All right. Okay, we're getting a lot of questions about concrete pots, so I'm going to ask a couple about this that have come in. How do you maintain concrete pots to last for a long time? Do they need to be winterized?
We're going to go right back to what I'm calling a riser or a pot foot.
Okay, so that's kind of the secret.
That to any material, it really is. Outside of that, especially concrete is heavy. So some people say, oh, well, in the winter, I could move it into my garage. I find that people who try to move a large, heavy concrete pot annually are either going to hurt their container or even worse, hurt themselves. And I would never want that. Not that you can't move it or that you're not capable. It's just the more we move a piece of concrete, the more chance we have to chip an edge or create a little bit of damage that in turn can become a larger problem over time as the seasons passed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're now getting a ton of questions about drainage. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed to our next segment. We had a feeling we would get good questions about drainage. So we had time allotted for it, but I see them coming in. All righty. First question. We've gotten several of these. Do you need to put rocks or gravel at the bottom of your pot for drainage?
No, you don't is the short answer. And I am sure that question will come up again with some of our other speakers, whether it be James or Peggy, that will speak to it too. In my opinion, and everybody does have a little bit of their own opinion on this, I find that using an appropriate potting media that is appropriate for what you're growing. For example, if I was growing succulents in a container, I absolutely would use a succulent mix. If I was growing, let's just say pansies in an outdoor container, I'd buy our Merrifield potting mix, and that's going to work great. The media is what's going to hang on to water or let go of water. Yes, rocks can have a place for the water to go because rocks don't soak up water like potting media would. But I still, my thinking is still leaning into your media in terms of drainage as opposed to putting rocks in a container.
Okay. Next question. Is there a downside to self-watering pots for those of us that tend to over or underwater plants and kill them? Oops.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it like this: you're almost already answering your own question. What I mean by that is, if we can sometimes over underwater, having something like a self-watering container might actually reinforce that that inappropriate watering schedule because you necessarily won't be thinking about it. I never tell anybody water on a schedule. I say let the plant and the potting media tell you. So gently probe into that media, go far enough down, whether you're using your fingers or some sort of dowel or something that you can go down gently without ripping up the roots, and find out how much moisture is being held. Lots of indoor plants like to really dry out really thoroughly in between waterings. And if you have a self-watering pot that you're keeping full of water and that soil never has opportunity, opportunity to dry out, you will run into some fungal issues, root rot issues, and just things that partner up with holding on to too much water.
Is that also kind of a downside? Because I have saucers obviously under my houseplants, but I realized they were holding water, but the plants weren't, like the water was staying in the saucer. And I had a plant that started getting really unhealthy, and I picked it up and realized there was all this water, like it kind of in the saucer still. So
yeah, I don't want to suggest that there aren't positives to self-watering containers. We're absolutely selling them, and we're not selling them to set you up for failure. So
I have some.
Yeah. So the positives to me are more like, if we have some outdoor self-watering, the big positives on those are It gets in Northern Virginia can get very hot in the summer. We could have, you know, weeks of 90, 100-degree weather. And we also like to take vacations and see our loved ones and family. And we may not be at home all the time to do this watering. So a self-watering pot is great if, hey, I'm gone for a week. I'm worried about this plant I bought that I absolutely love. I know it's really hot. I know it's going to need the water. That's what that self-watering system is for. In my mind, and geographically, you know, that changes too. So if you live in a climate that is warm all the time, Florida, for example, a self-watering pot is going to be a lot more common outside there. Our self-watering pots for outside here, I suggest everybody does not utilize them over the winter, because water will once again freeze, expand, and cause irreparable damage to the container. For indoor containers, self-watering, depending on the plant material, can work very well. Some things like to stay a little bit more wet. So it's more specific to the plants in terms of how much water they're happy to be with. And then, yeah, just being aware of wintertime, not a good thing for outdoor self-watering.
Okay, we actually had a question come in just now. That's probably a good one. And I don't know if you have any with you, but I know we have examples. So what are some examples of self-watering outdoor pots? And I know I have one at my house that I'm obsessed with, but.
Yeah, what we have is a pottery company called Michael Carr Designs, partnered with a potting media company, and together they took what normally was sold as just a normal outdoor container with drainage, and got rid of the drainage, meaning sealed that up, if you will, or just didn't produce the container with a hole in the bottom. And then there's a lip on the inside that basically just holds a cylindrical form. The easiest way for me to say it, and I don't have it up here with me, unfortunately, is there'll be kind of like a false bottom, a reservoir, if you will, that will hold water, but there'll also be a place where the potting media is inside, and there's slits in between the media and the water, so the media can soak up that water like a burning candle, a wick for a candle.
Yeah, would you consider an earth box to be self-watering? But it's like, I know a lot of people use it for vegetables.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Okay.
I mean, and you're probably a little more familiar, as I think you have an earth box or two, do you know?
I have one, and I just got my mom two. I could sing the praises of earth box, but we can talk about that later. I know David Yost uses them as well.
Yeah, cool.
Great for vegetables.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next question. This is going back to a little bit more about the drainage issue. So this from Jasmine. If you were to put pebbles at the bottom of the pot instead of drilling holes, does that kind of create, I guess that's kind of the self-watering idea. You have like a reservoir where the water can go, or is that still, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you can work it that way. You just have to be more cautious that when you do in fact water it, you know, if you overwater that system, it's hard to get that excess water out, or you don't want it to spill and make a mess in your residence. But yes, people absolutely use a system like that so that their container can have a bottom reservoir of water. You know, yeah, you just have to be a little bit more cautious with the watering, and not be afraid to get in there and look and find out how your plant's doing in terms of moisture.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, comment here. This person from Janie Lynn, she says, I like growing plants in their nursery pots. She buys the nursery pots in different sizes and just uses those because the drainage she finds to be the most effective. Upon watering, she leaves it on the counter, lets everything dry out. Yeah, that's a good comment. I would say, do you have any feelings on just buying the different sizes of grow pots? If you have, I would say common issues, maybe overwatering. If there's a lot of drainage there, that's probably a good thing. But
yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with using a grower's pot. A lot of us are aesthetically pleasing ourselves, but utility is more important for the life of the plant. The plant doesn't care if it's in a pretty container, but it does care how it is in its home, if you will. You know, me and my partner, absolutely, we will water all our indoor plants. We bring them to the sink, and many of them are in like a grower's container. Then after we water and the water's ran through into the sink, we'll then pop them back into our like sleeved containers. And yeah, it's a great way to do it. Some people use their bathtub.
Yeah. All right. One more question on this, then we're going to move on to like large plant containers for large plants. Is there a concern with mosquitoes breeding and laying eggs in the water of a pot with an interior reservoir, which holds substantial water? I wouldn't know if they could reach it, but what do you think? Have you ever heard of that before?
You know, yeah, for our outdoor ones where, you know, I would expect mosquitoes to be, of course, breeding in an outdoor setting. They're looking for shallow puddles of water to breed. The aqua pots for outside, they don't have a place really for any mosquito to get to that water, and the water is, I think, a little too deep. Self-watering containers, if you keep them wet all the time, indoor, outdoor, I could see fungal gnats reproducing. They would want to do that in any sort of overly wet environment. They're not detrimental to a plant, but they are gross and annoying, I would say. But yeah, I mean, mosquitoes, I've never seen anything like that. What I have seen is if somebody's had like what's called a water bowl, which is an outdoor large ceramic pottery that has no drainage. You could put an single aquatic plant in it. If you don't empty that and that water is not moving, it's stagnant, if you will, absolutely would breed mosquitoes outside.
Okay. All right, let's move on to large containers and big plants. We've got some questions. I'm going to start us off with a cool question. I've been like waiting for us to get to this topic. This is from Susan. She has a coffee plant from the U.S. Botanic Gardens. When she got it, it was a little sapling about 4 inches tall. It's now 2 feet tall with one stalk. What type of pot do you recommend for tree-like plants, or I guess actual trees, right? You can plant trees in pots.
Yes, you absolutely can. And I mean, of course, we're not talking about putting a 40-foot tall sequoia into, you know, a container, but absolutely trees come in different shapes and sizes, and you can absolutely grow a tree in a container. It does come back to the size of the root system. We have to accommodate the root system. And with trees or plants in general, everything has a different growth rate. So if you have a tree that's a fast grower, you need to be aware of that root system running out of room in the container. So you do need to probe or familiarize yourself with the growth rates. You know, people will put not really a tree, but like a boxwood, which is some of these can get pretty big, and people say, yeah, I'm going to put this in container and I want it there for 5 years. Not very realistic, in my opinion, to say that you wouldn't actually have to change that container over time to accommodate that plant as it grows larger with the root system. And another note, I guess, is my personal preference would probably be to put a tree-like material that could potentially be taller, heavier, and bigger into, of course, a larger, heavier container. So concrete, as long as it's got a big enough space for the roots to fit, works great because it's got a lot of heft and weight to it. So on a windy setting, like you said you had, Sally, you have better chance of having your plant stay upright on your balcony or outside exposed to wind in a heavier container.
Okay. Some of these, I know this, I'm not sure like what weight limit there is on this, but I know we have those, if you're dealing with heavy containers and you tend to move them around, we have those caster things, right? I can never remember what they're called, but what are those things called? And then I don't know if there's like a limit. I'm just assuming you can't like plant a dogwood in a giant container and then put it on a caster system, but
So yeah, that's a good question. There's lots of different names in the industry for what Sally's describing, which is basically a saucer with wheels or a caster system, plant caddy, saucer with wheels. I mean, there's no exacting, but all those are describing the same thing. We sell wheeled systems that have a saucer on top, or just wheeled systems that don't have a saucer, that support anywhere from about 250 pounds to 500 pounds. That's a considerable
okay.
amount of weight. They're made fairly durable. Things that to speak to weight and size and heaviness and mobility, you can buy a lightweight plastic container that is 2 feet tall and 2 feet across, and you can pick it up with one hand and move it around. Then you put potting media into it. Then you put a plant into it. And you water it.
Yeah.
Then it's no longer this lightweight thing. It's definitely lighter than it would be if it was made out of concrete or ceramic, but we have to be realistic about the weight of the plant and the media and the water afterwards itself too. It all factors in. So having a wheeled system, if you feel like you will, in an indoor setting, sometimes it's nice to be on wheels. So if you need to water it and it's big, you can move it to an area where you can safely water it without potentially getting water all over your carpet or a nice wood floor. Or if you simply want to say, hey, I liked it over here, but I might want to move it to this other window and I'm not sure. So I'm going to keep it on wheels. So when that time comes, I can just move it. Makes it a lot easier. But moving a full container of a plant of many different sizes can be difficult, and you do want to use caution to be careful for yourself and your plant.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to that plastic pot because I got that. It was inexpensive, but now I have this big shrub in it. So I'm like, not only is it tipping over in the wind, it's like still really heavy. It's just not heavy enough for the plant that's in it. But yeah, I need to replace that thing, which is what my takeaway from this call. Okay, here's the next question. I think this actually moves into some of the stuff we were talking about, like some specialty type containers that are just interesting for people to know about. I have a 3 foot tall osmanthus in an 11-inch pot since last summer. It seems happy. It flowers almost constantly. Do I need to put it in a bigger pot? How about a bag pot?
So to answer the first part of the question, which is, do I need to repot it? We would, the plant so far sounds like it's telling us all good things, like it's in a happy home. I'm flowering, I've got fresh growth, and all those things are telling you that the roots have been established, they're happy, and they're able to give the rest of the plant all the energy it needs to do what it does and be beautiful. That doesn't mean that over time, once again, that root system won't start to spread to the outsides of the container. And the only way to know that is to really gently probe in there and look, and look down the sides to see if those root systems have hit the extremities of the container. And with that being said, anytime that we transplant, move from one container to the next, move from a container to the ground, from the ground to the container, anytime we are moving a plant from one area where it's living to the next, you have to expect a little bit of shock to that plant. It is normal. It's actually no different if you were uprooted and moved somewhere. You just have to get used to your new home. So just know that you should expect to see a little bit of shock, a little bit of, it could be anything from a leaf dropping to discoloration to a little bit of a droop or anything that's saying, hey, something's changed here. But you try to just be as gentle as possible, get it back in the media, get it watered in, and let it reestablish itself in its new home.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, our next question, and there may be a lot of different kinds of bamboo. I'm not sure. Could you plant bamboo in a container? Does that depend?
So You could. I know I'm a little limited in my knowledge about bamboo, but the things I know about it is that it vigorously roots itself. If you plant it in the ground, a lot of people will use what's called bamboo barrier, which is like a plastic barrier to prevent the roots from going any further because it will overtake. With that being said, it will eventually overtake a container. And if you kept splitting it or going bigger and bigger, there would be no end because it is a very vigorous growing plant,
Okay.
both in its top of the ground and its root system.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. I like this question. How does one repot a huge indoor tree? I have an almost 40-year-old braided ficus that's 20 feet tall. Wow. In a 24-inch container.
With,
Sally,
with
talk.
several really good friends.
Sorry.
I said you would need to do it with several really good friends, meaning, yeah, so you know, of course, you've got to accommodate the weight of that plant. And so how do you get it out of the container? You would want to use something to slide around the out. Let me use my container here. You would need something to loosen it around the edges. I don't know exactly what I would use to do that, but something thin and flat that you could get down to loosen it around the edges. And then with a team of enough people to very gently lift and free that from there. If it's really heavy, I mean, the only thing you can do is have more people help you and be very careful. If the container is to the point where you don't think you're going to use it anymore, I've seen, this is more in a grower's container. I've seen people just cut the container off. I wouldn't expect anybody to break a container though, to get a plant out. That doesn't make sense to me, unless you have absolutely no connection to that container and don't intend on using it ever again. But that's a good question, but a tough one. You get that out by being careful and having enough people so that you can lift it out very carefully after you've freed the exterior, so it could be loose enough to pull out of that container.
Yeah, and I would add too, we do help people with repotting at the garden center. We do professional, like you can bring your plants. Obviously, you're not bringing in a 20-foot tree, but we do help people with repotting. So if that's something you want to follow up with and talk to someone about your specific needs, send us some photos. We would be happy to do that with that plant or with any of your plants. That one sounds like a challenge, but that's very cool. You've had that plant for that long.
I'd love to see the plant.
Oh yeah, we all would. I know David does this. He did a plant clinic and he helped repot a Christmas cactus that was like 120 years old or something. They had lost. They knew it was like their great grandmothers or something. It was very cool. Okay, so we've gone through everybody's questions, so we've got a few more minutes. So what I'm thinking, Andy, we'll do for a few more minutes is go, one more question. Oh, good question. That actually is what I was going to suggest we get into. From Sabrina, what is the best container for seeds? Can you talk about the different seed pack, peat planters, cell packs, any of that stuff? Is that
my preference is to let James White speak to that. He is much more familiar with that. You know, I know those seed starting trays are kind of, they've been around for a long time. There's different versions of that, and those different versions is what I think James would just be way more suited. Awesome question though, and we need to somehow circle back to that, or make sure James gets that information.
Definitely. So let's talk about some other specialty type pots that you had mentioned to me that people have been interested in. The Smart Pot, you had mentioned to me, it's a felt or fabric container. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and once again, this is going to be another thing that I think James will be a little bit more detailed in, but generally, you know, what they call like a smart pot is, think of like black gardening fabric. Look, it's porous. Water can go through. It's fabricy. You could just smush it flat, or you could open it and it's cylindrical, couple of handles. A lot of people are using those, whether they're growing vegetables, plants, anything. They're not as aesthetically pleasing, but they're super utilitarian and awesome and work well and allow the water to drain right out depending on what you're growing. So I've seen those become more and more popular for vegetables and other things
Well, it's great if you don't have a lot of storage space and you're shifting pots frequently.
or
I
yeah,
would,
like annual plantings, right? So let's say I'm growing a vegetable. I'm not going to grow that vegetable all year for 365 days. It's when my gardening season is active. So I could, in theory, use a container like that. And then when it's winter and I'm currently not growing anything, then exactly that gets into the Rubbermaid tote or something and into the shed or wherever, because there's plenty of room.
okay, cool. Yeah, I need to look into those actually for my space since I live in a condo and don't have a ton of storage. All right, next question. Strawberry pots. Can you talk about strawberry pots? I also know, are they literally for growing strawberries? Is this
Hence the name. Yes, that would be the intent. I don't have one up here with me, but just picture instead of a traditional pot that's all wall in one big opening, we do have an opening on the top of a strawberry pot, but there'll be many little pockets coming off of it. So strawberries love growing in that sort of setting, but so do herbs and succulents, things that might have a shallower root system. A strawberry pot is a really fun, cool way to grow things. It's both effective and it looks cool.
okay, cool. All right, next question. Does anyone make, I think I've seen these, does anyone make a clear plastic container so that you could see the roots, like where the water pools? Basically it's plastic, but it's clear so you can see what's going on inside.
They do. Generally, where I've seen that in my experience is more for like orchids, and
That's where I've seen it. Yeah.
so and an orchid pot is like a ceramic, it's generally a ceramic pot, but it will have if every other one of this pattern was like
Like
checkered,
a lot of openings.
not there exactly, so that it was exposed to air, and if it was in like a humid, moist setting, the root system of that orchid could take on that moisture. So that's where I've seen that. I haven't really seen many clear containers outside of that, or in an outside setting, but yeah,
Well,
for
really,
stuff.
as I'm thinking about it too, and this is, I don't know what this group's looking for, but if you want to see what's going on, like an orchid's a great way. Like if you have kids and you want to see the water and the roots and the moisture and the way it changes, like that would be super visible on that plant because the root system is like right up against the side of the pot.
Right.
That's just my like thoughts on that.
Right.
Okay, let's see. Okay, since we have a few minutes, you had noted if we have time, we should get to this. Can you talk a little bit about turning containers into water features? You had mentioned that's something people have been interested in, and it sounds cool. So can you talk a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, containers don't have to just be for plants in our garden. In fact, you can get a container that sole purpose is to just look beautiful, like an art piece, an anchor piece in your residence, where you're like, I've got this great, beautiful colored urn and I'm going to put plants around it, and it can be a focal point. And in that same breath, you can do things like a water feature. So we sell a stem kit, which is a rigid piece of tubing that can fit into a piece of pottery that can then in turn get placed over a pond or a water basin and have water run through it, come out the top, cascade down the sides. You can create some awesome art water features out of containers. They do not need to be just for plants. I've personally turned more than I can count into like a water feature system, and it's something that you can do, and it's just another way to get outside and enjoy the beauty of all this stuff.
Great deal, man. I would love to do something like that, like as a bird bird bath type thing, because I've got a few birds that visit my balcony. All righty. So we've just got a few minutes left. I want to say quick thank you myself to everybody for joining this class and for participating in this new format for us. We're going to be trying out the same class format tomorrow with James. It's going to be focused primarily on vegetable seeds. If we have time, we'll get to maybe some flower seeds. There's just so many options, and he's really our seed. I think he does all the buying for our seeds. He's one of the managers at the Fair Oaks store, very knowledgeable. So he'll be on tomorrow. Thursday, we have a lot going on this week. Thursday, our plant specialist, Paul McLean, will be on to talk about growing citrus indoors. Thank you, Irene. Irene says she enjoyed our Q&A, Andy. So I know you can't see.
Wonderful.
Thanks, guys. All right, I see more comments coming in. Thank you all. Yeah, let us know. I love getting emails. I'm happy to send questions on to Andy or other members. You guys can also call the store with any questions that you have, or come in and go in and see Andy at the Fair Oaks store. We're all happy to help you. And just let us know what you think too about these class formats, because we're back. We're offering in-person classes. We're trying out some new stuff. We just want to keep you guys interested and answer the questions that you guys have about gardening. So thank you all. Andy, do you want to wrap up with any last minute information or anything?
I want to say the same thing Sally did, is just thank you everybody, you know, for popping into it and asking all these wonderful questions. And like Sally said, we're only a phone call away, or you know, hopefully if you're in the area, not too far of a drive, depending on traffic, come visit us. We're excited. Spring is like, I don't know if it's here right around the corner. It's a little bit of both. Yeah, and we're all really excited to just be going into spring and seeing all the flowers and plants going to bloom. It's awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Man, thank you so much. All right, hang on. I'm going to stay on here for a second because the ficus person with the ficus is going to send me a picture.
Wonderful.
To my email. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, Andy, thank you. This was great. I had fun. I learned a lot, and I've learned I've got to replace that container that keeps tipping over. So, okay. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.